The autumn wind carried the scent of smoke and dying leaves across the Montana territory as Catherine Walsh stepped down from the stagecoach. Black morning dress billowing around her slight frame, she clutched a worn leather satchel everything she owned in the world and gazed across the endless expanse of prairie grass that stretched toward the distant mountains. 3 months ago, she'd been Mrs. Catherine Walsh, wife of a respected banker in Chicago. Now she was simply Catherine, a woman with no family, no fortune, and nowhere left to go except the address written on a piece of paper tucked inside her reticule, the Broken Arrow Ranch. Owned by one Matthias Stone. The letter from her late husband's attorney had been brief and devastating. James had gambled away their home, their savings, everything. His final act before consumption claimed him had been to write to his childhood friend in Montana, begging Matthias to provide for the wife he'd failed so completely. "You, Catherine Walsh?" The voice was deep, roughened by years of frontier living. Catherine turned to see a man approaching, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a worn coat. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes, the deepest blue she'd ever seen, held a mixture of wariness and something that might have been pain. "Mr. Stone?" Her voice barely carried over the wind. He nodded curtly, his gaze taking in her city clothes, her pale complexion, the way she held herself with the careful dignity of a woman trying not to break. "James wrote to me," he said simply. "I'm sorry for your loss." Catherine felt tears threaten the first she'd allowed herself since receiving word of James's debts. This stranger's kindness, after weeks of creditors and cold lawyers, nearly undid her careful composure. "Thank you," she whispered, "and thank you for answering his letter. I know this is an imposition. It's not." His tone was firm. "Brooking no argument. James saved my life once, long ago. I owed him a debt." His eyes softened slightly as he took in her obvious exhaustion. "Come, let's get you home." Home. The word sent a pang through Catherine's chest. She'd lost her home, her husband, her entire world. But as Matthias Stone lifted her small trunk onto his wagon with easy strength, she felt the first flutter of something that might have been hope. The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across a valley. Between two ridges, its main house built of weathered logs and river stone. Smoke curled from the chimney, and golden light spilled from the windows, creating a picture of warmth and belonging that made Catherine's throat tight with longing. "It's beautiful," she breathed, and meant it. After the noise and dirt of Chicago, after the suffocating confines of the boarding house where she'd spent her final weeks, this place felt like sanctuary. Matthias pulled the wagon to a stop near the front porch. "It's home," he said simply. But Catherine caught something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and gentle on her waist. For a moment they stood close together in the evening light, and Catherine felt something stir in her chest, something she'd thought died with James's betrayal and death. "There's something we need to discuss," Matthias said, his voice careful, "about the arrangements." Catherine's cheeks flushed. Of course. She was a burden, a woman alone, and there would be talk if she stayed in his house unmarried. "I understand," she said quietly. "Perhaps there's a boarding house in town, or I could find work." "No." The word was sharp, almost angry. Matthias ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly younger despite the silver threading through the dark strands. "That's not what I meant. Catherine, I know this is sudden, and I know you're grieving, but I think we should marry." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her satchel dropping to the ground. "I what?" "Marriage of convenience," Matthias continued quickly. "Nothing more. You need protection, security. I need... ... He paused, his jaw working. "This ranch is lonely, Catherine. It's been lonely for a long time. You'd have your own room, your privacy. I'd ask nothing of you except your company at meals. Perhaps help with the household accounts. In return, you'd have a home, a name, protection." Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage. To this stranger with the kind eyes and careful hands. After James's lies and gambling, after the humiliation of discovering her husband had sold everything, including her jewelry, to feed his addiction. The thought of trusting another man seemed impossible, but where else could she go? What other choice did she have? She began, then stopped. In the gathering dusk, Matthias Stone looked solid and dependable. Nothing like the charming but weak man she'd married in Chicago. You barely know me. I know James trusted you enough to marry you, Matthias said quietly. I know you've suffered loss and betrayal, and yet you're still standing. That tells me what kind of woman you are, Catherine Walsh. Marriage of convenience. She'd heard of such arrangements, particularly on the frontier, where practical concerns often outweighed romantic notions. It would give her the protection of his name, the security of his home, and perhaps in time it might become something more. Right, she whispered. Yes, they were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher, with only the ranch foreman and his wife as witnesses. Catherine wore her best gray dress. She couldn't bring herself to wear her wedding dress from her. Marriage to James And carried a small bouquet of late wildflowers that Matthias had picked for her that morning. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. But when Matthias slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Catherine felt a flutter of something that might have been possibility. You may kiss the bride, the preacher announced with a smile. Catherine's eyes widened in panic. They hadn't discussed this part. But Matthias simply leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, his lips warm and gentle against her. Skin, welcome to the family, Mrs. Stone, he murmured. And Catherine felt tears threaten at the kindness in his voice. That evening, as they sat down to their first dinner as husband and wife, Catherine found herself studying this man she'd agreed to marry. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong hands scarred from years of ranch work and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he hadn't always been as serious as he seemed now. Tell me about yourself, she said softly. About this place. I want to understand. Matthias was quiet for a moment, carving his beef with precise movements. Not much to tell. Built this ranch from nothing, been here 15 years. Raised cattle mostly. Some horses. It's a good life. Have you ever been married before? The question slipped out before Catherine could stop it, and she felt her cheeks burn. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Yes, Matthias said simply. Name was Mary. She died in childbirth 8 years ago. The baby too. Catherine's heart clenched at the pain in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. But his knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. Catherine understood that some kinds of grief never truly healed. After dinner, the awkward moment she'd been dreading finally arrived. Matthias showed her to a small room at the back of the house, simply furnished but clean and comfortable. This was going to be the baby's room, he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. But it's yours now. Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The room was lovely, with a window overlooking the garden and a quilted coverlet on the narrow bed. But something about it felt wrong, like she was an intruder in a shrine to his lost dreams. Matthias, she began, then stopped. How could she? Explain that sleeping in his dead child's room felt like a betrayal of them both? What is it? Perhaps I could sleep in the barn, she said in a rush. Just until I can fix up a room somewhere else. I don't want to impose, no. The word was sharp, final. Matthias turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. You will sleep next to me, or not at all, Catherine. You're my wife now, even if it's only on paper. You belong in the main house, in the master bedroom, beside your husband. I won't have you sleeping in the barn like a hired hand. Catherine's breath caught. But I thought, you said this was just an arrangement. It is, Matthias said firmly. But you're still my wife. I won't have the men talking. Won't have anyone thinking I don't respect you enough to share my bed. We don't have to. That is, nothing has to happen between us. But you'll sleep where a wife belongs. The thought of sharing a bed with this virtual stranger terrified Catherine. But there was something in Matthias's eyes, a fierce protectiveness, that reminded her she was no longer alone in the world. All right, she whispered. The first weeks of their marriage passed in careful politeness. Catherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for Matthias, and the hands, spending her days tending the garden and learning to manage the household accounts. Matthias was unfailingly courteous, thanking her for every meal, asking about her day. treating her with the gentle respect he might show a cherished sister at night. They shared the large bed with a careful distance between them, a wall of propriety that neither dared cross. Catherine would lie awake listening to Matthias's steady breathing, acutely aware of his warmth beside her, fighting the growing attraction that seemed to strengthen with each passing day. Because she was attracted to him. Despite her resolve to keep their arrangement purely practical, despite the grief and betrayal that had brought her to Montana, Catherine found herself drawn to her husband's quiet strength, his unexpected moments of humor, the way his eyes softened when he looked at the horses he so clearly loved. She began to understand that Matthias Stone was a man who felt deeply, but showed little, carried the weight of past losses with stoic endurance. Like her, he'd learned that love could bring devastating pain. Like her, he was afraid to risk his heart again. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. Sometimes their hands would brush as she passed him his coffee, and the contact would send sparks racing up her arm. Sometimes she would wake to find him turn toward her in sleep, his face relaxed and younger looking, and she would have to resist the urge to smooth back the dark hair that fell across his forehead. The turning point came on a cold October evening when Catherine was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the wind began to howl with the promise of an early winter storm. "Storm's coming in fast," Matthias said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the house. "Going to be a bad one." Catherine nodded, stirring the stew she'd made from the last of the garden vegetables. "Will the cattle be all right?" "Should be. We moved them to the south pasture yesterday." Matthias hung up his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "But we might lose power. This kind of wind can bring down the lines." As if summoned by his words, a tremendous gust shook the house, and the lights flickered ominously. "Get some candles ready," Catherine said. But before she could move, the lights went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. "Catherine?" Matthias's voice was sharp with concern. "I'm here," she called back, but as she turned toward where she thought he stood, her foot caught in the edge of a rug, and she stumbled forward. Strong arms caught her, pulling her against a broad chest, and suddenly she was pressed against Matthias in the darkness, his heart thundering beneath her palms. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, worried. "No, I'm fine." But she made no move to step away, and neither did he. In the darkness, with the storm raging outside, something shifted between them. Catherine could feel the warmth of his body, could smell the scent of leather and pine that clung to his clothes. When he spoke, his breath stirred the hair at her temple. "Catherine," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes, I need to tell you something. I need you to know, ... He paused, his arms tightening around her. "This arrangement of ours, it stopped being just convenient weeks ago, at least for me." Catherine's breath caught. "Matthias, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving James, still healing from what he put you through, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't care for you. I can't pretend that having you in my bed every night, so close I can hear you breathe, hasn't been the sweetest torture I've ever endured." His confession hung in the darkness between them, brave and vulnerable, and everything Catherine hadn't dared hope for. "You think I'm still grieving, James?" she whispered, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Matthias, I grieved James while he was still alive. I grieved him every time he came home with whiskey on his breath and lies on his lips. I grieved him every time he chose a card game over his responsibilities, his gambling over his wife." She felt Matthias go very still. "Catherine, I mourned my marriage long before James died," she continued, the words pouring out in a rush. "What I felt when he passed wasn't grief, was relief. Relief that the lies were finally over, that I could stop pretending to love a man who had stopped loving me years before." "Then why?" "Because I'm terrified," Catherine whispered. "Because I've learned that men can be charming and kind and still destroy everything you hold dear. Because I'm afraid that if I let myself love you, truly love you, I'll lose myself again." Matthias was quiet for a long moment, his hands gentle on her back. When he spoke, his voice was so soft she could barely hear it over the storm. "I would never hurt you, Catherine. I would die before I caused you pain." "I know," she breathed. "That's what terrifies me most of all, because I think I'm already falling in love with you, Matthias Stone, and I don't know if I'm brave enough to let myself fall completely." In answer, Matthias cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Then we'll fall together," he whispered, "and we'll catch each other." When his lips found hers in the darkness, Catherine felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower reaching for sunlight. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck he'd given her at their wedding. This was warmth and promise, and the sweet ache of two hearts finally acknowledging what they'd been trying to deny. Catherine kissed him back with all the longing she'd kept buried, all the hope she'd been afraid to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she knew there would be no more careful distance between them. "The candles," she whispered against his lips. "Can wait," Matthias murmured, and kissed her again. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping them in the house together, but Catherine had never felt more free, without the careful boundaries they'd maintained, without the pretense that their marriage was merely convenient. She and Matthias discovered each other in ways she'd never dreamed possible. He was gentle and patient, understanding that her experience with intimacy had been tainted by James's selfish demands. He courted her with soft kisses and gentle touches, never pushing, always giving her time to trust. "You're beautiful," he whispered one morning as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, the storm finally beginning to ease. "So beautiful it takes my breath away." Catherine had never felt beautiful with James. She'd felt like a possession, something to be used and discarded. But in Matthias's eyes, she saw herself as something precious, cherished, loved. "I love you," she whispered, the words coming easily now. "I love you so much it frightens me." "Don't be frightened," Matthias said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I've got you. I'll always have you." But even as Catherine lost herself in the sweetness of new love, a shadow from the past was riding toward the Broken Arrow Ranch. Determined to destroy everything they'd built together, James Walsh hadn't died of consumption as Catherine had been told. He'd faked his death to escape his gambling debts, leaving his wife to face the creditors while he fled west with what little money he'd managed to hide. For months, he'd been working as a hired gun for men who didn't ask questions about a man's past, men who paid well for someone willing to do whatever was necessary. But lately, James had been thinking about Catherine, about the devoted wife he'd abandoned, the woman who'd probably mourned him properly and moved on with her life. He wondered if she'd found some way to survive, if she'd remarried, perhaps. The thought ate at him like acid. Catherine belonged to him. She was his wife, his property, and no piece of paper could change that. If she'd found comfort with another man, James intended to make them both pay. The information hadn't been hard to come by. A few questions in the right saloons, a little money spread around, and he'd learned that his widow had indeed remarried to some rancher named Stone, who owned spread in Montana Territory. Well, James thought as he rode toward the Broken Arrow, Ranch Catherine was about to learn that her husband wasn't as dead as she'd believed. And this rancher she'd taken up with was about to discover what happened to men who touched another man's wife. Catherine was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. Something about the way he sat his horse, the familiar tilt of his hat, made her blood run cold. When he drew close enough for her to see his face clearly, the basket of wet clothes fell from nerveless fingers. "Hello, Catherine," James said with the charming smile she'd once found so attractive. "Miss me?" Catherine's world tilted sickeningly. This couldn't be happening. James was dead. She'd seen the death certificate, had attended his funeral. But here he was, very much alive, looking at her with the cruel amusement she remembered too well. "You're dead," she whispered. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," James said, dismounting with the easy grace she remembered. "Though I have to say, you seem to have gotten over your grief pretty quickly. Married again so soon." "I'm hurt, darling." Terror clawed at Catherine's throat. If James was alive, then her marriage to Matthias wasn't legal. She was an adulteress, a bigamist. Everything she'd found here, love, security, happiness, was built on a lie. "What do you want?" she managed to ask. "What's mine?" James replied simply. "My wife, my property. Did you really think you could run off and play house? With some cowboy without consequences?" "I thought you were dead," Catherine repeated, her voice stronger now. "Everyone thought you were dead. The doctors said." "The doctors said what I paid them to say," James interrupted. "Amazing what a man will do for the right price. I needed to disappear for a while, let certain debts fade from memory. But I always intended to come back for you, Catherine. You're mine." No, the word came out stronger than Catherine felt. "I'm not yours anymore, James. I'm married to Matthias now." "Our marriage was never dissolved," James said, his voice taking on the hard edge she remembered from their worst fights. "Which makes your little arrangement with this rancher adultery. How do you think the good people of Montana Territory will feel about that? How do you think your precious Matthias will feel when he learns his wife is nothing but a lying whore?" Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. James had always known exactly how to hurt her, exactly which words would cut deepest. "Catherine," Matthias's voice came from behind her, warm and concerned. "Is everything all right?" She turned to see her husband approaching from the barn, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp alertness as he took in the scene. Pale face, the stranger on horseback, the tension crackling in the air. "Matthias," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Ah, the famous Mr. Stone," James said, his smile widening. "Allow me to introduce myself. James Walsh, Catherine's husband." The color drained from Matthias's face. Catherine watched as he processed James's words, saw the exact moment when understanding hit him. The look of betrayal that crossed his features was like a knife to her heart. "That's impossible," Matthias said slowly. "Catherine's husband is dead. You can see him very much alive," James replied cheerfully. "Which makes your marriage to my wife invalid, I'm afraid. But don't worry, I'm here to collect what's mine and relieve you of the burden of an adulterous wife." Catherine saw Matthias's hand drift toward the gun at his hip and felt panic surge through her. James was fast with a pistol and utterly without conscience. He would kill Matthias without hesitation if he felt threatened. "Please," she said desperately, stepping between the two men. "James, please, we can discuss this. There's no need for violence." "Oh, but there is," James said, his mask of pleasantry finally slipping. "You see, Catherine, you've embarrassed me. You've made me look like a fool running off to play at being some other man's wife. That kind of behavior requires correction." Dismounted and took a step toward her, and Catherine instinctively backed away. But James was faster, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "Let her go." Matthias's voice was deadly quiet, more dangerous than any shout. "She's my wife," James snarled. "I'll do what I want with her. Not anymore." Matthias drew his gun and won. Smooth motion, the barrel trained on James's chest. "Release her now." James laughed, but Catherine saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He'd expected to face a simple rancher, not a man who moved like a gunfighter. "You'd shoot an unarmed man?" James taunted. "You're armed," Matthias replied calmly. "And you're threatening my wife. That makes you a dangerous man who needs killing. Your wife." James's grip on Catherine's arm tightened, making her gasp. "She was never really your wife, Stone. The marriage was a sham, a lie. She's nothing but a whore who spread her legs for you while her real husband was away." Catherine saw the moment when Matthias's careful control snapped. His finger tightened on the trigger, but James was already moving, using Catherine as a shield as he drew his own weapon. "I don't think so," James said, pressing the barrel of his gun against Catherine's temple. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down your gun and walk away. Catherine and I are going to have a little reunion, and then we're going to disappear. Try to follow us, try to interfere, and I'll put a bullet in her brain." Catherine felt the cold metal against her skin and closed her eyes, praying for strength. This was her fault. Her presence here had brought danger to the man she loved, had destroyed the peace he'd worked so hard to build. But as James's arm tightened around her waist, as she felt his hot breath against her ear whispering threats and promises of punishment, Catherine realized something important. She wasn't the same broken woman who'd fled Chicago months ago. Matthias's love had given her strength, had shown her what she was worth. She would not let James destroy the life they'd built together without a fight. "James," she said quietly, "there's something you should know."
"What?"
His attention focused on her, and Catherine felt his grip loosen slightly. "Never loved you," she said clearly, loud enough for Matthias to hear, not even in the beginning. "You were charming, and I was young and foolish, but I never loved you. And I stopped respecting you long before you supposedly died." James's face contorted with rage. "You lying bitch, but I love Matthias," Catherine continued, meeting her true husband's eyes across the distance between them. "I love him with everything I am, everything I have. And legal or not, he's the only husband that matters to me."
Ow.
The distraction was brief, but it was enough. James's attention wavered for just a moment, his grip loosening, and Catherine threw herself sideways with all her strength. The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder. Catherine hit the ground hard, her ears ringing from the blast. A moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, terror paralyzing her as she waited to feel the pain of a bullet wound. "Catherine," Matthias's voice, rough with fear and love. She opened her eyes to see him kneeling beside her, his hands gentle. As he checked for injuries, behind him, James lay motionless in the dirt, a spreading pool of red beneath his chest. "Is he?" she whispered. "Dead," Matthias confirmed grimly, as he should have been months ago. Catherine began to shake the enormity of what had happened, hitting her all at once. She'd been married to 2 men. Her second marriage was invalid. She was a bigamist, an adulteress. Everything she'd found with Matthias was built on a lie. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, pulling away from his touch. "I'm so sorry, Matthias. I didn't know. I thought he was dead. I would never have married you if I'd known, Catherine." "Stop." Matthias's voice was firm but gentle. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she met his eyes, expecting to see accusation, betrayal, disgust. Instead, she saw only love, fierce, protective, unwavering love. "You are my wife," he said clearly. "Legal document or no legal document, you are my wife. You belong to me, and I belong to you, and nothing James Walsh said or did can change that." "But the law can go to hell," Matthias said bluntly. "We'll get it sorted out. We'll find a judge, file the proper papers, have another ceremony if we need to." "But Catherine, you need to understand something." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I would rather live unmarried with you than married to anyone else in the world. I would rather face scandal and judgment and legal complications than spend one day without you." "You mean that?" she whispered. "With every breath in my body," he replied solemnly. "James Walsh might have had legal claim to you, but he never owned your heart. He never deserved your love or your loyalty or your tears. I do, and you deserve better than the hell he put you through." Catherine felt something ease in her chest, the terrible knot of fear and guilt beginning to loosen. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, Matthias. You're the only man I've ever truly loved, and that's all that matters," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Everything else is just paperwork." It took 6 months to untangle the legal complications of Catherine's situation. The territorial judge was understanding but thorough, requiring proof of James's deception, witness statements, and careful documentation before declaring Catherine's marriage to Matthias valid. During those months of uncertainty, Catherine learned just how deep Matthias's love ran. He never wavered, never suggested that perhaps it would be easier if she left, never treated her as anything less than his beloved wife. He stood beside her through every legal proceeding, every whispered conversation in town, every moment of doubt and fear. The community of ranchers and townspeople, who might have been expected to judge harshly, instead rallied around them. James's reputation as a gambling cheat and con man had followed him west. And when the truth of his deception came out, most people agreed that Catherine had been as much a victim as anyone. On a warm spring morning, exactly 1 year after their first marriage ceremony, Catherine and Matthias stood before the same circuit preacher and exchanged vows again. This time with full legal authority and the complete blessing of the community. Catherine wore a new dress, pale blue like the Montana sky, and carried wildflowers from their own meadow. When Matthias slipped a new ring onto her finger, this one engraved with both their names and the date, she felt the last shadows of doubt finally fade away. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced, and this time there was nothing chaste or restrained about the kiss Matthias gave her. This was the kiss of a man claiming his woman before God and the world. The kiss of a love that had been tested and proven true. That night, as they lay in their bed, their legal, sanctified marriage bed, Catherine traced patterns on Matthias's chest and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, "taking in a stranger, marrying a woman you barely knew?" Matthias caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a kiss to her palm. "Never," he said firmly. "Best decision I ever made was asking you to marry me that first night. Even with all the complications, the scandal, the legal troubles." "Especially because of all that," Matthias replied, turning to look at her in the moonlight. "Catherine, any fool can love a woman when it's easy. When there's no cost, no risk, no sacrifice required. But real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that changes you, that only comes when you're willing to fight for it, to choose it again and again, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I choose you," she whispered. "Every day for the rest of my life I choose you." "And I choose you," Matthias replied, pulling her close. "My wife, my love, my heart, forever." Epilogue 5 years later. Catherine Stone stood on the porch of the Broken Arrow Ranch, watching her husband teach their 3-year-old son to sit properly on his first pony. Their daughter, barely walking, clung to Catherine's skirts and babbled excitedly at the sight of her father and brother. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Catherine's head for figures and Matthias's knowledge of cattle had proved a formidable combination. More than that, their love had become legendary in the territory. The story of the widow and the rancher who'd fought legal battles, social judgment, and a man risen from the dead to claim their right to happiness. "Mama, look." Little James, named for his father, not the man who tried to destroy their family, called out as he managed to stay on the pony for a full circle around the corral. "I see, sweetheart," Catherine called back, her heart full to bursting. "You're doing wonderfully." Matthias caught her eye over their son's head and smiled the warm, intimate smile he reserved just for her. Even after all these years, that smile could still make her pulse quicken, could still remind her of that first night when he'd told her she would sleep beside him or not at all. She'd chosen to sleep beside him, to build a life beside him, too. Love him with everything she had. And he'd proven day after day, year after year, that he was a man worthy of that choice. As the sun set over the Montana territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd come to this place broken and afraid. A woman with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter begging for charity. She'd found so much more than shelter. She'd found home. She found love. She'd found herself when their son was older. When he asked about the story of how his parents met, Catherine would tell him about a rancher who saw a desperate woman and offered her not just a place to sleep, but a place to belong. She'd tell him about love that grew slowly, carefully, rooted in respect and watered with kindness. But most of all, she'd tell him about choosing each other again and again. Through every trial and triumph, through every dawn and every sunset, until the end of their days under the endless western sky.